Why are some people able to compete at an elite level and others are not so able? Individual differences in people are reflected in a wide range of different abilities when it comes to physical activity. In this program, we explore individual differences in males and females and in trained and untrained individuals. We'll look at training regimes, physiological effects of exercise on the cardiovascular and respiratory systems, and how these effects are different between males and females. The basic differences between males and females come down to differences in anatomy and muscle development. Males outperform females in many sports and athletic events. They are typically bigger, stronger, and have denser bones. But there are events where the female anatomy brings distinct advantages, especially at certain stages of development.
And a white line.
So it's not just gender that accounts for some individual differences, but a combination of age and gender. For example, an average 18-year-old female typically has around 24 to 29% body fat. The figure for males of a similar age is 14 to 17%. This provides more buoyancy for females when swimming, but males have an advantage in events like long-distance running. Percentage body fat is similar for males and females during early childhood, somewhere around 16 to 18%. During puberty, girls' hormones act to increase their body fat percentage, whereas the percentage for boys generally slightly decreases during this stage of development. A number of other changes occur during this stage of development. The female pelvis is wider than males. Because of this, and the fact that females tend not to grow as tall as males, their centre of mass falls. With growing males, however, the centre of mass rises. They can therefore become less stable than females. This might explain why the balance beam is a discipline in gymnastics for girls, but not boys. And it also explains why teenage boys are more advantaged in high jump. The wider female pelvis can also decrease the efficiency of their running action. Females tend to have a wider running stride. Another anatomical change most pronounced in males during puberty is increasing shoulder width. Boys and girls have virtually the same breadth across the shoulders. By the time they're in their late teens, male shoulders are noticeably wider than females. Their arms are also longer. This means there's more area for muscle mass to develop. We talked before about hormones programming females to develop more body fat. The hormone controlling much of how a female body develops is estrogen. In males, it's testosterone. Females and males have similar concentrations of ATP and PC, or phosphocreatine, both essential energy sources for muscles. However, due to the smaller total skeleton muscle mass in females, they generally don't have as much phosphagen available for use during exercise, which means not as much ATP is synthesized by their muscle cells. Males therefore generally have greater upper body strength relative to the lower body. For this reason, girls may have difficulty doing press-ups or bench pressing weights, but have very respectable vertical jump scores. It also explains why girls might come close to boys when it comes to running events in athletics, but not throwing events. Overall, females have about 70% of the strength of males due to their lower muscle bulk. Females are generally more flexible than males, which is a distinct advantage in some events. Males tend to have quicker reaction times than females, a distinct advantage in team games like basketball and cricket and in events like athletic sprints. Differences between the performance of males and females isn't just due to differences in bone and muscle development. Important differences relating to the circulatory and respiratory systems also exist, which affect performance levels. The ability to consume oxygen for energy production is called oxygen uptake, or VO2. As you exercise, your VO2 increases. A higher uptake of oxygen is needed. Aerobically fit people can consume more oxygen per minute than someone who isn't aerobically fit. Everybody has a VO2 maximum, that is, a maximum level of oxygen uptake. Females typically have a VO2 maximum that is around 70 to 85% of the VO2 maximum for males. VO2 maximum is measured in millilitres per kilogram of body mass per minute. It's found by dividing a person's peak oxygen consumption in millilitres per minute by their body weight in kilograms. In this way, VO2 maximum levels can be compared between individuals regardless of their gender or size. So if Robert here has a body mass of 65 kilograms and a peak oxygen consumption rate of 2.8 litres per minute, or 2,800 millilitres, what is his VO2 maximum? 2,800 divided by 65 equals 43.08 millilitres per kilogram per minute. Here's one for you to try. There are two aerobically fit students, Thomas and Sarah. At the peak of an exercise session, Thomas, who weighs 72 kilograms, consumed 10,500 litres of oxygen over a 2-minute period. Sarah, who weighs 58 kilograms, consumed 6,264 litres of oxygen over the same period of time. Calculate their VO2 maximums, and once you've done that, comment as to whether Sarah and Thomas's figures would be typical for males and females. Ever heard someone referred to as having a big heart? In terms of males and females, it's the males that generally have the bigger hearts, or bigger heart volume to be precise. Their lung volume is also generally higher than that of females, and they have a higher hemoglobin and red blood cell count, meaning they can better supply oxygen to the muscles and use it effectively. This can be a distinct advantage for males in aerobic events like long-distance running. With a bigger heart volume, males also typically have a bigger stroke volume. That is, the amount of blood pumped out of the left ventricle with each heartbeat. Stroke volume depends on the size of the left ventricle. Stroke volume also differs at rest compared with during exercise, and we'll look at that in a bit more detail later. Heart rate is a measure of number of heartbeats per minute. Females tend to have higher heart rates than males for the same level of oxygen consumption.
35.
This is because their heart volume is smaller and their hemoglobin levels are lower, so the heart must beat faster to deliver oxygen to the working muscles during exercise.
29. Stop. That was 70, so 140.
Cardiac output, represented by the letter Q in the equation, is calculated by multiplying a person's heart rate by their stroke volume. It is measured in millilitres of blood per minute. For example, Ingrid here has a stroke volume, or volume of blood per beat, of 76 millilitres. Her heart rate is 88 beats per minute. What's her cardiac output? Females tend to have a lower cardiac output compared with males. This is linked to their smaller heart volume, even though their heart rates tend to be faster than males. Can you work out Julian's cardiac output? Multiplying the heart rate by the stroke volume gives us an answer of 7,505 millilitres per minute, or 7.5 litres per minute. We are now going to look at individual differences between trained and untrained people. Training can take various forms. Its effect on individual differences depends on the training regime. This refers to the type of training, like strength training or endurance training, and the range of various exercises that make up a training program. Other elements making up a training regime are the length of sessions, the number of sessions per week, the duration, and the intensity of the warm-up, conditioning phase and cool-down for each session.
Okay guys, we need to do a warm down now.
Different training regimes can take place in different conditions. Training, or more importantly, living at high altitude increases red blood cell concentrations, allowing more oxygen to reach the muscles during exercise. The effects of training on individuals vary according to a number of genetic and environmental factors. There are two types of responses to training: acute or immediate and lasting as long as the training and recovery does, and chronic or long-term adaptations that take about 6 weeks of regular training to start taking effect. One of the chronic effects of training is cardiac hypertrophy. The heart actually increases in size. Endurance athletes in particular develop larger chambers. Endurance training increases the left ventricle's volume and the stroke volume. There is also an increase in the thickness of the ventricle wall, although this differs between sports. Larger heart chambers lead to increased stroke volume. More blood is ejected with each beat. The stroke volume for an untrained person during maximal exercise might be around 112 millilitres, depending on age and gender. For a trained athlete, it can be around 130 millilitres, and for an endurance athlete, up to 180 millilitres. Training increases stroke volume at rest and during exercise. And as we saw earlier, female stroke volumes are lower than male stroke volumes in the case of both trained and untrained individuals. Males have the bigger hearts, remember? Heart rate in a trained athlete is lower than in an untrained person. For example, endurance athletes might have resting heart rates lower than 40 beats per minute, whereas an untrained person might have a heart rate of 90 beats per minute. A measure of the effect of training is when bradycardia occurs, when the resting heart rate falls below 60 beats per minute. Regular training produces a number of chronic effects on heart rate, including a lower resting heart rate, lower heart rate during submaximal exercise, slower increase in heart rate during exercise, lower heart rate during exercise, and faster return to resting heart rate after exercise. Increased stroke volume and lower heart rate enables the body to more efficiently circulate blood to all parts and gets oxygen to muscles more effectively. A chronic effect of training on cardiac output shows how a training program can increase efficiency of blood flow. At rest and during submaximal exercise, cardiac output is the same before and after the training period. Cardiac output is heart rate multiplied by stroke volume. The heart has become bigger, so has the stroke volume, but the heart doesn't have to beat as often to supply the required oxygen. Here's an example to illustrate. If before training an athlete's heart rate is 75 beats per minute and stroke volume 80 millilitres, the cardiac output equals 6,000 millilitres or 6 litres per minute. If after training an athlete's heart rate is 46 beats per minute and stroke volume 130 millilitres, the cardiac output again equals 6 litres per minute. Here's another one for you. If cardiac output is constant, what was this athlete's heart rate if the stroke volume was 120 millilitres? "50 beats per minute. In a trained athlete, the cardiac output increases during maximal exercise, when the muscles need as much oxygen from the blood as possible. Both stroke volume and heart rate reach their maximum levels. More blood can be pumped out of the left ventricle every minute. Cardiac output increases. Another effect training has on the blood is to increase the red blood cell and hemoglobin count. The main function of hemoglobin in red blood cells is to transport oxygen to all parts of the body. The higher the red blood cell and hemoglobin count, therefore, the more oxygen is supplied to muscles during exercise. We spoke earlier of the difference in VO2 maximum between males and female. Training increases VO2 maximum. In particular, it increases VO2 maximum during maximal exercise due to the increased oxygen supply to the muscles and its subsequent use to produce energy, or ATP. The increased oxygen supply is the result of things like improved cardiac output and the increased number of red blood cells. Moreover, when it comes to the use of anaerobic energy, an untrained person may hit the anaerobic threshold, when lactic acid starts accumulating quickly, at around 50% of VO2 maximum. A trained athlete may not hit that anaerobic threshold until around 85% of VO2 maximum. The trained athlete can perform at a faster pace without lactic acid accumulation. Another measure of how training increases the efficiency of oxygen supply to muscles is the arteriovenous oxygen difference. Regular training means more oxygen is supplied by the blood to muscles. This is brought about by an increase in the level of myoglobin, a substance in muscles that attracts oxygen from the blood, and an increase in the number and size of mitochondria in the cells. Arteriovenous oxygen difference is the difference between the concentration of oxygen in the arteries and that in the veins. In other words, it reveals how much oxygen is being used by the muscles. For example, at rest, the concentration of oxygen in the arteries might be 21 millilitres per 100 millilitres of blood. In the veins, it might be 14 millilitres per 100 litres of blood. The difference between these figures is 7 millilitres per 100 millilitres of blood, meaning that amount of oxygen is being used by the muscles. During exercise, more oxygen is taken from the blood for use by muscles for energy production. The venous concentration could drop to a level around 4 millilitres per 100 millilitres of blood. This means the arteriovenous oxygen difference is 17 millilitres per 100 millilitres of blood.